Hey there cherubs, this topic is going to be heavy and there's a lot that I need to get through, so I'm going to begin with talking to you guys about how I came to this point of wanting to make this video in the first place. So if you'll remember back in 2014, I think a lot of you will remember, I think it broke in 2014 and it kind of went on into 2015, there were a lot of stories coming about regarding creators on YouTube, popular, well-loved creators on YouTube, being exposed for sexual predation, sexual harassment, sexual assault, etc. A lot of their audience members and fans coming forward saying that they had had really uncomfortable experiences with these male creators, ranging from sexual coercion, requests for nude photos, you know, harassing comments, etc., right up to rape. There were so many different names that were involved in this story, far too many for me actually to mention now, but a few of the key ones were Alex Day and V1I in the British YouTube community. Sam Pepper was a massive one in the US YouTube community. You can find a lot of different master posts and a lot of different articles online to help you to get to grips with all of the different stuff that came out and the different stories that came out. But basically it began with, you know, just one brave fan of a creator saying something has happened here and it wasn't okay, and from there things kind of snowballed, and actually there were clusters of stories that were incredibly similar, that had a lot of the same kind of points and descriptions in them that various fans had given about specific creators. It was a really shocking, sickening, and sadly not necessarily surprising turn of events that occurred, and I actually followed the story with interest. I never followed any of these creators. I wasn't interested in the kind of stuff that they were making, but I was very interested in the story and the development of the story and all that kind of thing. So essentially, when the story broke about Alex Day, who is a creator that I had heard of on YouTube, I did know he was a UK creator and that he had millions of subscribers. I didn't subscribe to him. But after that story came out, and the reason I was interested in it was because a couple of YouTubers that I do subscribe to offered up stories of situations that they'd had with him, uncomfortable experiences that they'd been in that were to do with sexual coercion and sexual harassment and things like that. So that's how Alex Day was on my radar, kind of maybe more than the others were. After all the stories came out about Alex Day, he disappeared from his channel for a while, and because of all of the different videos that I'd clicked on referring to Alex Day and referring to the scandal, a few months later, I can't tell you how many months later, maybe 5 or 6, I actually had on my recommended videos on YouTube a video from Alex Day, and I can only assume that's because of the searches that I'd been doing and the videos that I'd been watching about the sexual abuse scandal that had been going on. And so I was like, oh, he's back on YouTube. That's a pretty bold thing to do, to step back into a community that you've done so much damage to. And I was curious and I clicked on this video and I realised that he had pretty much done a complete 180 on the kind of content that he was making before. And what he was talking about in this video that he'd returned to YouTube with was mostly Buddhism, meditation, veganism and spiritual stuff. And I was like, huh, okay. And then I visited his channel a few more times to note again and again that he was talking about, you know, spiritual evolution and meditation and, you know, just being more conscientious and more aware, never really addressing actually the huge scandal that had gone on. So I have a distinct memory of back then realizing, wow, this guy's going to come back onto the platform where he's caused so much damage and he's going to start talking about spiritual topics. So this is a disclaimer for you guys. I do not know what Alex Day is doing now. I haven't visited his channel since that time ages ago. I have no wish to know what he's doing now. I'm sure he probably is still making videos and still is part of the community. Despite some respected female YouTubers, you know, coming forward with their stories, either in blog form or in video form or whatever. So, so that happened, and I was reminded of that the other day when I noted in my recommended videos that I had a video there that looked like it was by V1I, who was another one of these YouTubers who was named and shamed, and stories came out about him. And I recognised him, I recognised his face, and I was like, why is this video coming up from him? And I realised that it was about entheogenic substances and spiritual experiences from natural, natural medicines, as we call them, sacramental bits and pieces from Mother Earth, if you will, mushrooms and stuff like that. And that's something I'm interested in, so I assume that's why it came up on my recommended. He now has a completely new channel, so he was also one of the YouTubers who was publicly outed, and the original story that came out about him was shocking, and I remember viscerally watching the YouTube video where this woman talked about what had happened to her underage in a hotel room with him when he was 21 or 22. I don't remember which age, but one of them. And it was fucking horrific. It was totally horrendous. And he did make a video owning up to it and basically saying that he was raised in an environment where he didn't realise those kinds of things were wrong. Then he kind of shuffled off his platform because obviously it was a big scandal at the time. So I noted that this guy now has a completely different YouTube channel. The recommended video, as I said, was about entheogenic substances. So I clicked on the channel. The channel is about spiritual experiences, primarily those that can be, experienced by the use of entheogens. And again, I was like, wow, here's this guy who's actually been publicly outed with various, corresponding stories from different women who are like, yeah, I had these experiences. And he's actually come back onto the platform and he's talking specifically about spiritual stuff. And it didn't surprise me. It actually didn't surprise me at all. It didn't with Alex Day and it didn't with V1I, that they have very quickly, really, after a big scandal breaking, which unearthed the terrible ways they've been treating their young, impressionable female fans, decided to go on to create a platform that was about sharing spiritual knowledge and talking about spiritual elevation. And the reason that this didn't surprise me is because when you are in any kind of position of authority or of respect and you're talking about spiritual stuff, you do have access to vulnerable people at times, and you do have access to people who are going to think the sun shines out of your crap hole and they're going to think you can do no wrong. It is a very murky world in spirituality and in New Age learning and all these kinds of areas of it, okay, neo-pagan, New Age, whatever. It's a murky situation where you can abuse your power and you can get yourself into a position of authority in order to have access to people who admire and respect you so much that you will be able to do whatever it is that you want to do. And it also allows people who have done shitty things to others, shitty, immoral and illegal in many cases things to others, to give themselves a pathway out of facing that guilt and coming to terms with what they've done, and instead once again position themselves as a person of authority and a person of standing who has an audience around them, whose energy they are, enjoying and basking in. It makes total sense that these two predators have gone on to start to talk about spiritual topics and assume some degree of authority with that stuff. And the video that I watched from V1I, can I also say, was actually sickening, because he was talking about being with a girl that he was dating at the time who had never had any experiences with entheogenic substances, and he was explaining how she didn't have a very good time on them when he administered them to her because he dosed her too high, he gave her too much. And to me, knowing what I know about him and what he actually did to a young girl of 15 years old, it doesn't make me comfortable to know that he is now using this platform again to reach an audience and again to assume a position of authority, but this time talking about the use of entheogenic substances. And that's a topic that I care greatly about and I'm very passionate about, and I'm sorry to get ranty, but he has no fucking business talking about that on this platform or any other, and he certainly has no business dosing impressionable women who, know him from his YouTube channel and clearly feel like they have an affinity with him, and they do or do not know about his past, but that's not the point. He's dosing, you know, women up to the eyeballs with these fucking substances. He has assumed his position of power and authority again, and he is attracting people to him that have given him that position of authority, and it's fucking dangerous and it's not okay. And like I said, it doesn't surprise me that these two men have ended up taking this route. And if I wanted to do a little bit more digging and a bit more research, which I don't, but if I did, I probably would also learn that there are other men who were involved in the scandal who have since gone off and decided that they're like fucking spiritual gurus and stuff, and they're building an audience around that. It is definitely a good way to go if you have been a shitty human and done shitty things, and instead of facing it and dealing with the consequences and making amends, you instead want to, you know, regroup an audience around you and have that that ego stroke, and also have access to vulnerable people who think of you as someone that they can trust and someone they look up to, someone they admire. It makes total sense that they would go down the spiritual route. You can find so much evidence of cults that have been built up around a leader who ends up being exposed as a sexual abuser. There are so many different documentaries and interviews with people who were members of various cults who say that they or their children or other members around them were sexually abused by, you know, by the cult leader. There's so much of that. You know, you can look at the Warren Jeffs cult, you can look at Jim Jones, there's stories about him. Of course, the Children of God cult, need I say more? Manson was at it, Charles Manson and the Manson family. He was, you know, pimping women out as prostitutes, abusing them while they were under the influence of drugs. It goes on and on and on and on, okay? And you can clearly see there that there is a correlation between the sexual predation and also the tendency to exclude followers from the rest of the world, create this isolationist policy where it's like, you know, you and your followers against the rest of the world. So you can clearly see there that there is a problem. But unfortunately, sexual predation happens in all kinds of far less obvious and far less publicised spiritual environments too. You know, sexual predation goes on in small group environments where you're just learning from a spiritual teacher, any number of things. It could be yoga, it could be, you know, the ascension process, any number of different things in any number of different spiritual communities. Sexual predation goes on at every level. And of course, I'm not trying to, you know, incite fear or induce paranoia. I'm just trying to talk facts here, basically, that these things do go on. And predators exist in every area of society and with every single subject and every single theme. We can't say that it doesn't exist in the spiritual realm too. Obviously, with spirituality, there are going to be quite a high percentage of people, not all by any means, but a reasonably high percentage of people who are seeking, they are searching, they feel like there's a void and they want to have that void filled. They're looking for purpose, they're looking for meaning, they may be looking for inclusion, understanding and love. So, you know, this is a very ripe crop for someone to come along who does have those kinds of predatory intentions with followers, with people who are seeking, people who are searching. There are going to be a certain number of people in any group around, you know, a charismatic spiritual leader who are going to be ripe for abuse and to be taken advantage of. In this video, I'm going to talk about a few different ways that you might be able to spot someone who's being predatory. First of all, I'm going to talk about the sexual stuff, then I'm going to talk about a little bit about financial and emotional. But I want to stress the point that the key ingredient here is your gut. It is your intuition. There are going to be situations where certain things happen with a particular individual who has standing in a spiritual community or has built an audience around their work. And when those things happen, they are harmless. They are not necessarily predatory. They are not necessarily problematic per se, you know. But there are going to be other situations where these kind of indicators that I'm going to give you will kind of weave in with your gut instinct as well. So the indicators, the red flags, if you will show up and they will kind of agree with what is already going on in your instinct. And when that happens, it's definitely important that you protect yourself and that you move away from the individual in question. First of all, ask yourself how you feel about the teacher. teacher, the leader, the person who is actually has the audience around them? How do you feel about that individual? Do you feel like they can do no wrong? Do you feel infatuated with them? Do you think about them constantly? Do you feel as though you could never attain the level of wisdom or insight that that individual could? Because if you feel those things, then it's likely you are already vulnerable. And even if that person that you're directing those feelings towards isn't a predator, you could certainly be vulnerable at some other point in life or in some other situation to being coerced or to being taken advantage of by someone else, right? Because when we look at somebody and we feel that they can do no wrong and they are actually, you know, at a level which is essentially above the human level, we are really vulnerable to being exploited. We are vulnerable to being convinced to do all kinds of things which are not in alignment with our highest good. They're not in alignment with our physical, emotional and mental well-being. So we have to look at how we are perceiving the people that we're taking instruction from, the people that we're learning from, and we have to be really honest with ourselves. This is first and foremost, is looking at how we perceive our teachers and our leaders, the people that we choose to give us their insight and their wisdom. And we have to acknowledge our level of vulnerability when we struggle to see a teacher or a leader as just a human being who is capable of fucking up, who is capable of having the same challenges and the same trials as anyone else. And of course it's important to ask yourself if a particular leader or teacher or mentor that you're working with is actually trying to set up that feeling of infatuation. Are they actually feeding into it? Are they actually doing a whole bunch of things to welcome it and to kind of grow that sense of infatuation in their followers? But it's important at the same time that you recognize your level of infatuation or fixation or inability to see those people as just human and capable of error. And if you feel like you're getting to that point where you are really just infatuated with this person and you're seeing them as on every level superior to you, then already it might be an unhealthy situation for you to be in. I really believe that. There are so many gurus that have really devoted followings, that have sexual scandals around them, that might have, you know, multiple people coming forward saying that this person abused their position of power. And, you know, a big part of it is that it's not just about abusing underage people. It's about projecting this image of yourself as loving your followers and wanting the best for them, whilst at the same time taking advantage of how much they have fed into that projected message that you've sent out. So it's not even, I know a lot of people say, well, you know, this particular follower was 25 and she can't really accuse guru so-and-so of coercing her or manipulating her when she willingly, you know, she willingly was sexually involved with him. It's not about that. It's about recognizing how it is set up, how the system of power is actually set up. And in the conversation that we've been having recently as a society about consent, I've noticed something really interesting that is happening in a lot of different societies now, which is that there's a discussion and there's a lot of legislation being put down that's to do with whether or not you can actually claim consent when the person that you're interacting with is a person in a position of great moral or religious authority over you. And I think that's appropriate. I think that's fair. If you know that you have a massive power advantage over the person that you are initiating sexual contact with, then you must know on some level that you're not being moral in initiating it, because there is a massive imbalance of power at play. And that's just as true with spiritual teachers as it is with religious teachers and religious figures. So are you giving your power away in any situation with a spiritual leader or mentor or teacher? Are you telling yourself you'll never be as good as them? Are you telling yourself that they can do no wrong? Are you actually doing certain things at their behest which you actually do not want to do? And I'm not even talking about sexually now. I'm just talking about following advice that they are giving that actually does go against what you feel is in alignment with your highest good, but you're doing it because they're telling you to do it, they're advising it, etc. Also, of course, you do have to ask yourself if you are sexually attracted to them, if you are starting to feel those kinds of feelings towards them, and that has got to come into your analysis of your own level of vulnerability too. If you're already having some intuitive hunches that something is not quite right, and that you could be on the road to being taken advantage of, or some kind of vibe is going on which doesn't feel good to you, and it does feel like it is to do with sexual predation, then definitely ask yourself, do you feel sexually attracted in return, and do you need to really take some action to get yourself away from that situation before it manifests into something even more insidious? When two people enter into a sexual relationship, an intimate relationship with each other, ideally it should always be on a fairly equal basis of power. Obviously there are massive nuances to that conversation, there are complexities around that conversation, and we could go into it for days, but essentially there should not be a massive imbalance of power where one person is being treated as the pupil and the other as the teacher. One person came into the interaction feeling as though they were seeking something, and the other person set themselves up as the person that was going to provide what the other individual was seeking. That creates an imbalance of power which can't make for a good sexual dynamic. It might make for mind-blowing sex for a minute, but it will not make for a happy ending. It's usually something that people then need to go to counselling to unpick and deal with for years sometimes afterwards. And you know, a lot of people do say, well, if it's all consensual and everyone's of age and all the rest of it, you know, I don't understand why the person that slept with the guru or mentor is so damaged. And it's like, think about it for a second. Think about it. The kind of imbalance of power is so vast, and it's been set up that way intentionally. So there's no way really that two people can come out the other side of something like that with both of them feeling respected and seen and safe. You know, only one person is going to feel satiated, and believe me, that's the person with the massive majority of the power. The other person is going to be left with their head spinning, with their trust in pieces, feeling like, what the fuck just actually happened there? If you're getting some weird feelings about a teacher or mentor of any kind, definitely do look at their reputation, definitely do look at what past students have said about them, definitely do your research to try and find out if there have been any scandals around them in the past. If you do feel like there's anybody that you can trust who also interacts with this person or knows of them, then broach the conversation with them. But at the same time, not everyone is going to agree with your opinion, and this is something that's really important. If you have a gut instinct that a teacher or mentor is wrong for you, and you are in a situation that could become sketchy or dangerous, then you need to move away from it regardless of what other people say. Sometimes the only people you're going to be faced with are people who are sincerely infatuated followers themselves, and also do not feel like this human being could ever do any wrong. And therefore you're going to find yourself in a bit of a lonely place if you keep having a recurring feeling that their treatment of you isn't quite right, or that they're vying for something more that you don't want to give. You know, you're going to feel isolated if you're surrounded by people who do worship the ground that this human being walks on. That doesn't mean you shouldn't step away from them. If you feel like something is wrong, then you feel like something is wrong. Don't wait for someone to co-sign on what's going on in your mind. If you feel and you think that something is ungroovy in the woodshed, walk away. A spiritual teacher is someone who has been given a trusted position of authority in one way or another. If they have an audience around them, then they are being given a certain level of trust and a certain level of respect. In much the same way as these YouTube people, you know, these popular people that had legions of young impressionable fans had that authority and that respect. In much the same way as rock stars also have that authority, they have been given that position, and that is a position that can be abused. And don't ever let anyone tell you that that's not the case. It can be abused, and it has been abused many different times in many different areas of life, in many different fields, you know, in many different traditions, in many different religious institutions. It gets abused, and whether or not the act feels consensual and seems consensual doesn't tend to always have much bearing on how the student, the pupil, feels at the end of it. You know, certainly there is very, very often this realization that yes, power was abused, whether or not in the moment you felt it was consensual and you felt it was something that you wanted. In situations where a particular spiritual teacher or guide does actually begin to fall in love with a student, you know, someone who is following their teachings or whatever, and it's really a genuine thing and it's not an abuse of power, it's just one of those things that happens, then my personal feeling is that obviously there should be a frank discussion between those two people, and there should be a decision made that from that point on there isn't going to be this teacher-pupil dynamic. You know, that scenario can't carry on, because both people have to be seen as equal in what they're bringing to the relationship, and both people have to be seen as having, you know, a dynamic ability to be teacher or pupil, depending on the situation, or neither. You know, they need to be able to bring all of their archetypes to the table. There can no longer be this vibe where one individual is in awe of the other individual's teachings, or one individual is learning and the other individual is imparting the knowledge. That can't happen in an intimate relationship, in a romantic relationship. It's not healthy. So I feel like in situations where that does happen, where the relationship becomes sexual or it becomes romantic, there just needs to be a dialogue, a very frank dialogue, and the best decision that can probably come at the end of that dialogue is a decision to terminate the work that is being done in any capacity where there is that power play at work, where one person is, you know, teaching or providing or, you know, being of service, and the other person is seeking and being filled and learning, kind of thing. I feel like if you get rid of that and you just decide that, okay, clearly we're falling for each other, clearly something's happening here, let's break away from this dynamic and move into another dynamic, I don't see how that's necessarily a bad thing, and I know that does happen, you know. So I think that obviously there are huge nuances to this conversation, but I think in a situation where genuinely two people have fallen for each other and they want to pursue something sexual or romantic or whatever, then I think taking the original dynamic away is the healthiest thing to do and the safest thing to do for the benefit of both people. Lots of people who realise either in the moment of it happening or in hindsight that their teacher or guide was a sexual predator will say that that predator actually kind of made them feel special in a way that maybe they didn't make the rest of the group feel special. They were given special attention, special treatment, they were complimented in specific ways that the other group members were not. They were made to feel like they were a cut above the other group members, or indeed that their teacher or mentor actually needed them in order to do the job that they were trying to do. So it's almost like being made to feel sincerely wanted and needed as a vital cog in the mentor's machine, basically. And that is often a lot of times how somebody corrodes a person's barriers and really kind of gets in and is able to take advantage. Lots of people say that a sexual predator actually engineered time alone with them when there wasn't any need for that time alone. They will engineer physical contact when there was no need for that physical contact, or they will engineer certain challenges or homework or missions for that specific student or follower, which kind of don't tie in with what the other members of the group are expected to do. So again, it's being made to feel special and it's being isolated from the rest of the group, you know, being made to feel like you are being seen as an individual, which is very attractive for a spiritual seeker. And it is something that will, you know, make certain kinds of seekers feel weak at the knees and totally overpowered. Other spiritual sexual predators will go in the opposite direction. Instead of making the follower that they are targeting feel seen and heard and feel special, they will go in the total opposite mode, and they will make the follower feel targeted and small and demeaned and worthless, and they will actually separate that group member from the rest of the group by hurling abuse or insults or demeaning language onto that member of the group and making them feel actually inferior to everybody else. And then that creates this desperation inside that follower to seek the approval of the leader, the mentor, the guide, and that can also be another way to corrode a person's defences and get them actually totally powerless and defenceless. There is a cross-section of people who move into being spiritual teachers, spiritual leaders, etc. for reasons which are mostly shadowy, because they haven't dealt with their shame, they haven't dealt with whatever was going on inside of them that they needed to process, and they actually want to have people around them that they can just project that shit onto, and that very much can happen. predation. And, you know, a lot of the time there doesn't actually need to be necessarily sexual predation for there to be emotional predation. That is something that can very much happen. When it comes to emotional predation, obviously there are a lot of people that talk about spiritual vampires, people that actually want to gather a group around them so that they can actually drain the life force of that group almost. And it's not about helping that group of people, it's really about providing the leader or the teacher with something that they require. Some spiritual teachers want to make an example of certain followers by hurling demeaning and abusive language onto them, like making them feel as though they need to earn the love and respect or approval of that teacher. And that can be something which is very emotionally gratifying on a very toxic level for the teacher. And for a while, the person that's being targeted in that way will also find emotional gratification coming from that. They will feel like they have been, they've gone through a certain trial, if you like. They've gone through a challenge which has led them out the other side. They've been, you know, verbally brutalized, they've been demeaned, they've been broken down, and then they've come out the other side to this amazing, you know, light of clarity and this feeling of just being emptied out of all the yuckiness, and they feel like they've earned access to a new state of being that's been provided by that experience that the teacher put them through. And they can really convince themselves of that, and on some level maybe that is true, but in the end the interaction is unhealthy because there's no need to demean and disempower and hurl abuse and everything else, and that's actually coming from the teacher or the leader's desire to feel like they are in control and they can have that kind of power over somebody. I would definitely recommend that if there's something going on in your instinct, your intuition, that's telling you that you are being emotionally preyed upon in some way, then definitely look for any indication that this spiritual guide or spiritual teacher is telling you what you think and what you feel, or telling you what you should do and how you should live. And they just keep doing that without ever asking you how you feel. They're not asking you for your contribution to what should be a dialogue. It's really just a monologue. It's a set of instructions. There's no interaction. There's no sense that you and this person are getting to a point where you can understand where each other's coming from. It's more just like you are being told how to live, you're being told what to think. If you've already got a weird feeling in your gut that a specific person that you're working with or whatever is kind of performing an act of emotional predation on you, then you might want to think about how much you feel instructed to do what the teacher's telling you to do, rather than there being a discussion around it. Do you actually feel like the teacher is interested in where you're coming from and what your point of view is and how your experiences may have informed your opinion? Or do you feel like you are just being told what to do and railroaded into it? Because very often the desire for power that some people have that leads them into these positions of spiritual authority can very much lead them to feel like all they want to do is get everybody to do exactly what they're told. And actually people are so nuanced and so different, and everybody comes from their own background and has their own stuff going on. And really, spiritual teaching should be spiritual nurturing. You as an individual should feel seen and heard. It shouldn't just be a one-size-fits-all set of instructions for everybody which doesn't necessarily align with your needs or your values. Another sign of potential emotional predation in spiritual leadership, I think, is based on just needing everybody to agree with you all the time. If you see a particular, leader or teacher, a person you're having classes with, anything like that, who gets very rattled and very incensed by somebody asking a question or giving a different point of view, and you find that they actually can't handle anybody coming up with anything that goes against what they might be teaching, or just questioning why something needs to be the way that it is, that could be a strong sign that what the leader or teacher actually wants from you is your full and unwavering allegiance. They do not want you to have your own point of view. They are not interested actually in your point of view. They want you to show blind, unwavering faith, and they just want you to go with what it is that they're saying. something. Now, I'm not saying that spiritual teachers can't have those times where they're rattled or they respond defensively to something. That can happen, you know, because I really believe that people that are talking about spirituality or teaching spiritual principles are human. They're just fucking human, and they're going to have their times where they take something the wrong way or they feel a bit rattled by something. But you're really looking for the sign that nobody else's opinion is valid, and any questions are taken very personally by the spiritual leader, the spiritual teacher, the mentor, whoever. So you've got to really watch out for that, because a lot of the time emotional predation is about the person with the authority getting what they need to feel emotionally fulfilled, getting what they need from the group. And what they need from the group, as I said, is that unwavering obedience almost, you know, and nobody actually kind of questioning something or putting a different point of view in. So if you see that and it already links in with what's going on in your instinct, might be a good time to, you know, get away from that person, create some distance between you and that teacher. If you're doing group work, if you're doing a training course, if you're doing anything like that, you might want to watch out for any spiritual teacher or leader that you're working with who's actually pitting certain sections of the group against each other and trying to create a kind of conflict between people within the group. Obviously there's nothing wrong with talking about how different members of the group are getting on with the work and, you know, complimenting members of the group on what they're doing well, or focusing on how certain people can improve certain things. But there's definitely something to be said for the more shadowy area of that, where certain members of the group are seen as less than other members who have done more work or who are excelling more. You should never feel singled out by a teacher. You should never feel like a group of people are singled out and told that they are less than, or they're not doing the work properly, or they need to be away from the other members of the group because they still have too much toxic shit to sort out, and they need to muddle through that while everybody else gets on with, you know, ascending to Buddhahood or whatever. You should not be made to feel like you are being bullied and you are being identified as a problem student in the group. Another thing that you might want to look out for, if your gut is giving you some weirdness about a particular teacher or mentor that you're working with, is whether or not you feel like you're only in their good books when you are excelling in the work that you're doing, or you're agreeing with them, or you're complimenting them on how much knowledge they have or whatever. The level of respect and interaction that you get from a teacher that you're working with should not be based on their approval of the extent to which you've blown smoke up their arse, you know. You should be able to interact with a teacher that you're working with, even if you might not be grasping the principles or practices as quickly as other students, even if you have more questions than other students. You shouldn't be made to feel rejected and outcast from the group because you are not working at the same pace. So that's something that you might also want to focus on as well if your spidey senses are tingling. So another form of spiritual predation that people certainly do kind of lock into and identify is financial spiritual predators. People who are looking to have vast sums of money from their followers and are looking really to, you know, to get rich off of their followers essentially. Or they want to take far more money from their followers than their followers actually have. You know, they really just want to almost put their followers financially on their knees so they can achieve whatever aim they want to achieve, whether it's a fucking compound in Guyana or a private jet. You know, so that is something that people definitely are on the lookout for. I definitely think it's worth considering how much money is related to graduation or evolution within the specific practice that the teacher, you know, teaches. So, for example, if money is consistently linked to going up a stage in the learning process or having access to more things in the learning process, then you can definitely take that as a potential signal that this teacher or leader is a financial predator of one degree or another. If you feel like you are being shut out of what you are actually there to learn until you put a certain number of coins in the coffer, then yeah, definitely there could be something going on there. If giving equals graduating, then that could definitely be a problem. If financial giving equals graduation to the next phase, elevation above the other people in the group, you know, access to so much more, I don't know, divine wisdom or insight, or almost as though they're saying, you know, the minute you give us some money, your power goes up by default, your ability to access this knowledge goes up by default. Those kinds of things I definitely would say you can give them a funny shady look. You can be like, fuck's going on there? Spiritual teachers of every single stripe need to make a living. If they want to do this full time, or if they are doing this full time, then in one way or another they are going to have to get hold of some money, which is the current value system. So I would definitely recommend that one thing you could do to try and figure out whether or not you are being coerced emotionally into giving money is examine the language that the leader or the organization is using to try and convince you to part with money. For instance, if you are learning things for free from a teacher or a guide of some kind, but they want to market their other products or services to you as well, then you might find that there are certain things that go on with language in that instance that make you feel more or less comfortable. Maybe for you there's a difference between somebody saying, if you would like more information on this, these are some things you can buy, and somebody saying, if you would like to improve as a human being and have access to more, insight and wisdom, these are some things you can buy. So it's almost like saying, if you spend this money, you'll become better, wiser, more fulfilled, stronger, more empowered. And then the difference between that and somebody saying, if you feel yourself as an individual with free will that you are getting something from these free resources that are being supplied, you might want to also consider these things. So there's a very big difference in language. One form of language is saying, hey, I respect you as an individual, thank you for your time. If you want more of these things and you want to support me in the work that I'm doing and the thing that I'm building, then you can consider these products, and the other form of language is saying, if you want to be a better human being, if you want access to more of your power, if you don't want to be a loser your whole life, but you actually want to, win, then these are the products for you. So it's like really manipulating language, and I think a lot of people have picked up on that kind of thing in marketing, and they may feel that that is a sign of a financial predator of one stripe or another. If you're in a private group or something like that and you feel like you are being coerced into giving money for resources or to develop courses or to have a building that you guys go to and stuff like that, and you feel that you are being treated unfairly or alienated because you do not have the money to give, or you don't want to budget for that, then again you might feel that that is financially predatory, that is a case of you only being able to belong to something if you can afford to remain in the club, as it were. You might feel that it's okay to give financially to a spiritual or religious group that have given you a lot of things and given you so much. You might want to give back financially, and I think that's fine, that's fantastic. But if you've got a weird feeling deep down inside that you are only being valued for the money that you can provide, and you are being given a degree of love or approval based on the amount of coins that you have supplied to this leader or organization, then yeah, obviously there's definitely something going awry there that you need to look at. I mentioned on my Facebook page that I was going to be doing this video about spiritual predators and stuff like that, and I did ask if there was anything else that people wanted me to touch on with this, and there was one person who said that they wanted me to talk about charisma. They wanted me to talk about how people with a great deal of charisma and a specific kind of personality can use that personality to get what they want. And if I could talk about that specific kind of predatory behavior. Now, this is a little bit of a grey area, because the reality is this: most people who can build an audience around their work and make a full-time living with their work, they have a certain style of personality which is conducive to being able to market their work, express their ideas, and engage an audience on a consistent basis. There's nothing actually predatory about that per se, that's just the way that person's personality is set up. You have to consistently be able to bring forth insights and information to your audience in a way that is easy for them to digest. You've got to be enthusiastic, you've got to be focused and forward thinking for your business to be able to thrive and for your audience to be able to grow and all that kind of thing. So you're going to have a specific kind of personality type really for that to be the case for you. It's not to say that people with charisma are the only people that have access to the information. It's just saying that people that have a more charismatic personality, they are sometimes a lot more likely to be able to build an audience and therefore some level of profitability around their work. I think what's important about charisma as a characteristic is that people are aware that charisma is something that a lot of cult leaders and sexual predators and, you know, faux spiritual fucknut douchebags actually have. They have charisma, and you have to realize that. So it's basically about recognizing that charisma in itself, it's just a character trait, it's just a personality trait, and actually it can get you ahead in a lot of different areas of life, not just with spiritual teaching and building a living around that, but it's also about recognizing that charisma is something that a lot of these kinds of people have. These people that end up being exposed as sexual predators, these people who are cult leaders who take all of their followers' money and, you know, abuse them and cut them off from the rest of the world and eventually convince them to kill themselves. All of these people, bar none, had charisma, oodles of it, fucking bags of it. It was pouring out of every fucking orifice, right? So I think you have to realise that yes, charisma can be something that is very much used as something to manipulate and coerce and to take advantage of people. But I think you have to look at how somebody with charisma is using that charisma. Are they using it in an unhealthy way? Are they demeaning their followers or audience members with it? Are they using it to coerce people? Being like charismatic on its own and being able to build a business around that is not a form of predatory behaviour. It could turn you off to see somebody who's very charismatic building an audience and using their charisma to be able to do so, but it is not in and of itself predatory. It's just something that specifically doesn't appeal to you. But it's not in and of itself predatory. You've got to look at how that charisma is being used. I want to end this video by recommending that you ask yourself what you are looking for in spiritual teachers, spiritual guides, mentors, people that are going to instruct you in specific practices, whether it's in groups, whether it's online, offline, whatever, whether it's people hosting courses or certifications. Ask yourself what you're looking for in that kind of person. What is it important for you to be able to see in them as far as personality traits and behaviors go? And for anybody out there who is a spiritual teacher or who is providing a spiritual service, or you would like to in the future, I would really recommend that you ask yourself what kind of spiritual teacher you actually want to be. If you've got something that you want to instruct people on or you want to impart to people, that doesn't mean that you are no longer also a pupil. It doesn't mean that you are no longer also you know, working your way through stuff yourself and experiencing challenges yourself, and it doesn't mean that you no longer have shadow stuff that needs to be worked out. So first of all, get really clear on that, and then decide what are your ethics going to be in spiritual teaching or spiritual leading. How do you want to treat the people that interact with you? What is an important thing to remember as a no-go area, you know, or a red flag for yourself? And what kinds of qualities do you want to actually exude? How do you want to behave? What kind of spiritual teacher do you want to be? As a spiritual student or a spiritual teacher, we should be asking ourselves what our responsibilities are. What are our responsibilities to ourselves and each other? If you're a teacher, what are your responsibilities to your students? Do you feel that you have a responsibility to acknowledge that there is an imbalance of power there, which would mean that it's not appropriate to get involved sexually or romantically? What other responsibilities do you have? What are your ethics? And don't be afraid or ashamed to talk about your ethics with the people that you're teaching or guiding. You know, if you are opening up a whole new class with a whole new group of people, don't be scared to take some time at the beginning to explain a little bit about you and about your ethics and what you will and will not do and what your ethics actually are. And this can actually allow you to feel more accountable within yourself as well. If you talk about your ethics with things like intimacy, overstepping boundaries, physical touch, all of those kinds of things, just lay it out on the line, then that also encourages you to be accountable with the people that you work with too. And another thing that I really want to mention is that if you feel that a law has been broken, if you feel like something illegal has taken place, do not be afraid to blow the fucking whistle. Do not go to somebody else within that group, within that organization, to talk about it privately. Go to the law in any situation where you can do, in any situation where it's possible for you to do so. There are so many good, you know, Bible-abiding Catholics who found out that their child or their, you know, a kid in their community was being abused by a priest, and instead of going to the police, they went to speak to another priest about it, and it was shut away, it was brushed under the rug. They dealt with it within the diocese and nothing was fucking done. And those men were passed around from, you know, from area to area, from church to church, given access to untold scores of underage choir boys and kids going to confession for the first time and all that kind of shit. It needs to be dealt with outside of the community that could indeed be fostering it and nurturing it and actually feeding into it. So make sure that you go to the law, and if you want to talk about it and figure out the legality of it, go to a solicitor or go to somebody that is as far away from the organisation as you can get. Do not allow people to take that truth and sweep it under the rug just as quickly as you actually spoke it. So I really wanted to mention that as well. There's so much more I could have covered, honestly, Pop-Tarts. It's a really massive topic. I would love to know your thoughts and feelings on this one, your personal experiences, your views on it. Anything and everything would be amazing to read. So much love and self-love. Mwah. Blessed be, guys.